The humans call this world Hespisto,
the mech lord rumbled.
There's a lot of them down there. The red robe types. The ones that look like evil sons, but squishier.
A bubble of laughter ran through the assembled knobs, save for the evil sons present, who were doing their best to look like they weren't glowering.
They've probably got lots of interesting tech, 'cause those humans tend to.
The mech lord continued.
And normally, I'll be sending you all down there to get it and kill them all. But there's a little snag.
Uftak glanced sideways and saw his own confusion mirrored on the other green-skinned faces around him. What could possibly be a snag to a war as mighty as this one? Unless...
You see, some other gits got here first,
the mech lord said.
And we could fight them too. That could be a good laugh. But while we was doing that, the Yumis might get away, and that would just be a waste.
Heads nodded. Humies weren't exactly a scarce resource, but you couldn't always rely on some being about when you wanted a scrap, so it made sense to use the ones that were there.
Or talk to.
The temperature in the war room plummeted. Uftak could see his breath in front of his face, and faint tendrils of frost began to creep along the walls. Orcs readied their weapons, unsure what was going on, but ready to fight it, or, if no better options presented themselves, each other. The air pressure increased rapidly, from unnoticeable to the point where Uftak felt like something was pressing in on his eardrums. He shook his head and growled, trying to clear the sensation, but it persisted until... A bubble of energy washed out from the other end of the dais to where the mech lord was standing, sending the smoke from his entrance billowing, and incidentally knocking the fumes aside to give every orc in the room a clear view of Kaptin Badrukk. The mightiest freebooter captain who'd ever lived, the hero of the War of Daka, the breaker of the Grand Guard and the plunderer of Panatep. He stood resplendent in his lead-lined greatcoat, his bald head crowned by his mighty bicorn, which was as tall as a well-fed grot and dripping with medals taken from the corpses of Humi commanders. He was leaning casually on his long-blade chopper, and had the Ripper, a gun so radioactive its simple presence in a room practically constituted an aggressive act, tucked under his arm. He was flanked by 3 more Flash Gitz, each one imitating him as far as possible in their mode of dress and armament, but not coming close to rivaling his sheer ostentatiousness and utter gaudy magnificence. Lurking behind them all was an orc that had to be Bad Mech Mogrok, another Bad Moon's Big Mech, who fought under Badrukk's banner and was undoubtedly the source of his technological advances. For the first time in his life, Uftak Black Hawk laid eyes on an orc who might just be as impressive as the mech lord.
Ta-da!
Greetings friends and welcome to the Imperium's Most Wanted. I'm Lorcan and this is OnlyWar. The introduction to this video is taken from the Black Library novel Brutal Kunnin by Mike Brooks, that follows the rise of Uftak Black Hawk through the ranks of the warband of the Mech Lord during his invasion of the Forge world of Hephisto. I highly recommend this novel, even if you generally don't stray away from the abundance of Imperium-focused novels. As well as giving us a highly enjoyable narrative and some characters you'll find yourself really pulling for, it also gives us a first real look at Kaptin Badrukk, the flashiest of Gits. The quotes from that novel will stay relatively spoiler-free. We'll look at some lore for those less familiar with orc culture, covering how an orc becomes a freebooter and a Flash Git, and some of the possibly tall tales told about the captain of the Black Tooth throughout his voyages through the galaxy. We'll also take a look at what aspects of his personality are revealed in Brutal Kunnin, and what the future could hold for old Badrukk. If you were able to ask an orc, without him ripping your arms off and beating you to death with the soggy ends, how much Daka is enough Daka, you'll either elicit a response of confusion, mirth, anger, or all three. The answer to an orc is simple. There's no such thing as enough Daka. Orcs like 3 things more than anything else: crumping heads in a fight, going really fast, and the deafening roar of big guns as they shoot up some unfortunate target. Flash Gitz are those orcs whose penchant for outrageous guns surpasses all others. Were these greenskins just concerned with owning the best guns, they would doubtless coexist within their tribe with no problems. But it is in their nature to boast outrageously, showing off their dagger in such a way that they can rouse the ire of their war boss. These orcs are often exiled from their tribe, whereupon they invariably join up with the Freebooters and become a mob of Flash Gitz. Since he and his newfound mates will all have the same obsessions and are more than willing to hire out their services to any orc war boss in need of some shooty gits to help his war out, Flash Gitz can indeed be found in the host of any war boss. Kaptin Badrukk is one of the most notorious orcs in the 41st and 42nd millennium. An avatar of opulence, this flamboyant figure leads a legion of freebooters from the bridge of the Black Tooth. A monstrous kill cruiser, bristling with guns and ordnance and bearing the glyph of the Jolly Orc. A one-eyed orc skull with crossed bones behind it, synonymous with the king of the freebooters. He is exceptionally cunning, violent and wealthy beyond belief, and the envy of orcs the length and breadth of the galaxy. Orc freebooters are notorious pirates and thieves. They prey upon anyone foolish enough to stray into their hunting grounds, screaming out of the dark on plumes of fire to blast apart their foes. When an enemy vessel is crippled or foolishly tries to surrender, the freebooters will smash their way on board, killing anything that moves and hauling their booty back to their hidden bases to count their ill-gotten gains. Freebooter warbands are typically made up of greenskins who have been thrown out of their clans. However, some will be stragglers from when a tribe is annihilated, either in a spectacularly destructive war or due to some other disaster. In recent times, this has often been the result of warp storms encroaching upon greenskin territories, and while plenty of orcs have made it clear before their worlds or space forts have been destroyed, the encroaching energies of the Great Rift have sent many a bit peculiar, skewing their rambunctious orc nature and leaving them either viciously acquisitive loot grabbers or else straight up mad boys. Whatever their origins, freebooters are shorn from the greater masses of orcdom, adopting their own unique culture that many greenskins see as dubiously un-orky in its outlook. Abandoning the traditions of their originating clan, they nominate a leader, invariably the biggest, and therefore most right of them all, to be their freebooter war boss, before setting out to maraud around the galaxy and cause as much trouble as they can. While no orc ever loses his love of a good punch-up, freebooters are notorious for being grasping and avaricious to a fault, motivated by the selfish desire to amass as great a personal fortune of teeth as they can. They garb themselves in garish colours and ostentatious trophies, festooning their war gear with precious metals such as gold that are of little value to most orcs, and displaying the glyph of the Jolly Orc wherever they can on back banners, vehicle hulls and the like. They will fight for any war boss willing to hire their services, at least until the teeth run out. Freebooter warbands are every bit as varied as those of the orc tribes, and often substantially more hodgepodge. Bad mechs and bad docs are much in evidence. Alongside ragtag mobs of freebooter boys, rebellious grots rub scrawny shoulders with speed-freak bikers, dribbling mad boys, and explosive-obsessed tank busters. Many freebooter warbands are composed mainly of Flash Gitz, richest and most obnoxious of all orcs, for the mercenary life tends to rapidly render an orc one of two things: rich or dead. Flash Gitz take every opportunity they can to fight alongside the rest of the boys, if only to flaunt their revoltingly powerful weaponry in front of their less fortunate brethren. Arrogant and willful, the Flash Gitz believe that they are the top of the pecking order of orc society. This means that many Flash Git mobs are booted out of their tribes for giving the war boss a bit too much stick, or for just being a bunch of smug show-offs. Others voluntarily pursue the life of a freebooter, so that they can get their hands on even more booty without having to share a single tooth. The Gits are instantly recognisable by their ostentatious apparel, and the air of swaggering self-importance. Each is festooned with piercings, medallions, trophies, animal furs, and gilded glyphs proclaiming the greatness of their owner, usually topped off by an extravagant hat. Many Flash Gitz originate from the Bad Moons clan, and the two factions always enjoy a good brag over barrels of the finest fungus rum that teeth can buy. The arrival of a Flash Gitz mob is usually announced by the jingle and clank of their many possessions, as they love parading their wealth in front of other orcs and want everyone to know about it when they do so. Even their attendant grots are heavily ornamented and well dressed and take great pride in boasting of their master's exploits. If there is one thing the Flash Gitz like more than strutting their stuff, it's using their highly customized shooters to vaporize their enemies. The so-called snaz guns used by the Flash Gitz vary tremendously in design, but because bucketfuls of teeth tend to encourage a mech to produce his best work, they're all uniformly deadly. Woe betide the fool who gives the Flash Gitz an excuse to test out his latest purchase. The Flash Gitz seen amongst the hordes of most orc tribes are there as mercenaries. However, they also form the mainstay of many freebooter warbands. Mob upon mob of Flash Gitz will rally behind the banner of a suitably intimidating freebooter warboss in the name of rampaging around space, blowing things up and grabbing as much loot as they can carry. Amongst such Flash Gitz crews, boisterous competition quickly reaches unhealthy levels, with so many aggressive and mean-spirited show-offs jostling for their share of the loot. Infighting and one-upmanship become endemic. Such disciplinary issues can cause the freebooter warband to implode altogether if left unchecked. However, when directed by the iron will of a sufficiently merciless freebooter warboss, this mutual apathy instead becomes a powerful asset. Knowing that openly battering one another will only draw their warboss's ire, the Flash Gitz instead redouble their efforts to show their rivals up through spectacular deeds of reckless destruction, pillaging. Roaring space shanties at the top of their lungs, they storm into the fight with their snaz guns blazing and sweep the horrified enemy away in a tide of enthusiastic savagery. If a few rival mobs get blown up in the process, well, that proves they just couldn't handle their Dakar. Kaptin Badrukk is the most famous freebooter of all. A legend amongst his own cutthroat subculture, Badrukk has plied the stars in the Black Tooth for several blood-soaked decades. The captain leads a vicious warband of villains known as Badrukk's Flash Gitz, and has fought at the side of every major warlord in recent history. He maintains that without the devastating weapons of his Gitz, many of those warlords would have been long dead, a claim that any who have seen them in action can well believe. Badrukk is a typical freebooter warboss only in that his personal appearance is ostentatious in the extreme. Ugly as sin, his bald and heavily scarred head is decorated with medals taken from defeated Imperial admirals whose ships he has ransacked and left for dead. Badrukk's teeth, so numerous that his face is permanently split by a hideous rictus grin, are plated with an alloy of adamantium and priceless gold, stolen from the Palace of Undying Light. Unfortunately, no further details of this palace raid exist, and gold is only referenced in Age of Sigmar, but it's a big galaxy. The captain's gilded armour is tarnished only by the blood of his most recent victims, and his back banners proclaim his supreme abilities as a fighter and conqueror. A lead-lined greatcoat protects Badrukk from the radiation generated by his beloved weapon, the Ripper, a gun so dangerous that merely standing near it is tantamount to a death sentence. The weapon once belonged to an Ogren bodyguard of a subsector governor, and the captain has since modified it to fire unstable plasma canisters instead of the high-caliber bullets normally associated with a Ripper gun, so that each hit detonates with incredible power. Badrukk was chased out of his tribe of fellow Bad Moons on charges of having too many teeth for his own good. Quite an achievement for a Bad Moon. From the day of his exile, the captain's accomplishments have far outstripped those of his fellow freebooter warbosses. Fighting alongside the fleet of Warlord Garaghak, Badrukk blunted the tendril of the Hive fleet Kraken, with a daring raid on the Nord Queen at its heart. Once again, a tall tail with some holes in it. Warlord Garaghak has terrorized the Forzar sector located within the Segmentus Tempestus since 936 and held sway over pretty much the entire sector, having conquered Forzar itself in 996. He had looked poised to strike against the Ravengard homeworld of Deliverance next. However, the largest Orc empire in the Segmentus Tempestus belonged to the Archmaniac of Calvernia, and he was subjugated by Warlord Gazgul in M42, so it's very possible Garaghak has also joined the Prophet of Gork and Moor. Hive Fleet Kraken first appeared in 990 at the eastern fringe of the galaxy before entering the Ultima Segmentum and eventually being broken at Macragge, but this is the opposite side of the galaxy to Garaghak's stomping grounds. So unless the splinter of the fleet was very far away from other known tendrils, this again could be questionable. Norn Queens are highly intelligent Tyranid bioforms that tailor the genetic makeup of the bioforms they produce to adapt to an environment or a tactical situation the Hive Fleet finds itself confronted with. It is they that control the Hive Fleet and send orders to their lesser bioforms through the synapse organisms, such as Hive Tyrants and Zoanthropes. Nord Queens are typically found aboard Hive ships within the very centre of the Hive Fleet, so even getting close enough to take one of these down would be an immense feat. One tale which is a bit more confirmed is that Badrukk and his Flash Gitz were employed by an Orc war boss Grog Ironteeth during the War of Dakar against the nascent Tau Empire. Having initially enjoyed a good scrap against the Kroot, Grog found their Tau allies to be much less accommodating to engaging in glorious melee combat. Finding himself outmaneuvered and outgunned, a furious Grog employed as many freebooters, tank busters and Flash Gitz as he could, including securing the services of Kaptin Badrukk's boys. With the shootiness of his War significantly increased by all this hired Dakar, Grog struck deep into the Farsight Enclave, gaining more captured Tau weaponry to adapt to their cause with each success. Most impressive of all were Kaptin Badrukk and his Flash Gitz, who annihilated team after team of fire warriors with their snaz guns. Their rampage of destruction was only stopped by the arrival of a Manta missile destroyer, which cut down the Flash Gitz with hails of railgun fire. Out of cigars, and possibly a bit wounded, but definitely out of cigars, the king of the Freebooters decided to tactically withdraw and still harbours thoughts of revenge on the Tau Manta. The final claim to fame is that the captain has personally slain a void whale. These beasts can reach a length of 12,000 Terran miles, and they are rarely encountered by Imperial forces. This tale most likely comes from the time of Abaddon's 13th Crusade, when a badly wounded creature was detected on a course for Catachan, apparently driven before a large force led by the captain. Catachan would have seemed an unlikely destination for Badrukk's boys, being as it is one of the most hostile planets in the entire Imperium. Unlike other war bosses who might relish the scrap with both the renowned Catachan jungle fighters and the deadly native flora and fauna of the planet, the lack of obvious loot might explain why Badrukk turned his attention elsewhere. For an Orc, Badrukk is an excellent strategist and acts as an advisor for any warlord rich enough to meet his exorbitant fees. However, after the battle, he and his Flash Gitz usually persuade their employers to give them the lion's share of the booty before climbing back aboard the Blacktooth and heading off in search of more carnage. Many warlords see this as a price well worth paying for the sake of a good scrap, and the unforgettable sight of Badrukk and his Flash Gitz unleashing their deadly weaponry upon the panicking foe. Badrukk's attacks have become especially daring and spectacular in recent years, making use of teleporter strikes to drop his Flash Gitz precisely where they need to be. Directed force bubble weaponry traps enemies in a kill zone with them. This is thanks to the efforts of Bad Mech Mogrock, a flashy Bad Moon's big mech formerly in the employ of Gruk Face Ripper, who owes Badrukk his life. The captain rescued Mogrock from the disastrous conclusion of the war on the night world of Alarak Prime during Gruk's Red War, and he has been wringing the bad mech dry for his technological know-whats ever since. With Mogrock's grudging aid, Badrukk has successfully raided the Necron treasure world of Tanotep, ransacked several isolated planets in the Imperial Nihilus, and defeated the so-called Grand Guard of the Chaos Warlord Nashgar, the Unrepentant. Although again, the details of these exploits are patchy at best. His most recent raid on the Imperium of Man was on Hephaesto, a forge world of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Military-minded to a degree, it had its own Skitarii legions with its own machines of war, and enjoyed an alliance with the Knights of House Nansus. However, Hephaesto saw war as a means to an end, a way to procure the raw materials or architect to protect itself, its assets or its allies, or to send its Red and Midnight warriors to reinforce its bonds with other parts of the Imperium or the Adeptus Mechanicus. The Forge World's primary focus was on the rediscovery of ancient technology, on deciphering those relics, and on attempting to complete damaged or corroded plans. Perhaps it was no surprise then that when war came to Hephaesto, it was Ronrul Ilutar, Prime Hermeticon of the planet's node Primus, who had assumed the mantle of tech priest dominance. He was, indisputably, the most senior tech priest on the planet. He'd pierced the Veiled region with an expeditionary fleet and returned with 3 different ancient STC databases, one of which had been constructed and was even now regulating the volcanic nature of the planet beneath him, converting the limitless power of the magma core into energy for the forges more efficiently than ever before. It is here that the Mech Lord's Tech War formed an easy alliance with Badrukk, in exchange for splitting the loot of the Forge world. And we see in the further accounts from Brutal Kunnin how entering agreement with Kaptin Badrukk, whether purchasing his services, or in this case parlaying a loose alliance, can be a double-edged sword for any war boss. Something screamed over their heads with a noise like the very sky being torn in two. Uftak caught a glimpse of gold-painted wings and the leering, jolly orc banner of Kaptin Badrukk, and heard a thunder of high-caliber weaponry. He turned to watch, but Badruck's personal Wazbum blaster jet had already gone, disappearing into the distance. In its wake it left the staggering, burning wreck of the Humi Walker, which toppled sideways and collapsed. It also left, appearing on the ground at the base of the spoil heap in a shimmering bubble of teleport energy, Kaptin Badrukk and a whole host of Flash Gitz.
Let them have it, lads.
Kaptin Badrukk boomed, his voice audible even from further up the slope than Uftak was. As one, the 20 or so Flash Gitz raised their snaz guns and opened fire. The cacophony was unspeakable, and the combined light of the muzzle flares threatened to rival the light of the setting sun. The nearest walker spasmed and jerked as the concentrated barrage of exotic firepower punched through its armor, severing joints, smashing support struts and destroying circuits. After 5 seconds of bombardment, the walker collapsed onto its front with a crash that shook the ground. The last Humi walker realized too late that its companion had been fatally damaged, but its cannon was now hanging off and trailing sparks anyway, courtesy of something explosive lobbed by one of the speed freaks. It took 2 lumbering steps forwards towards Badruck's boys, revving its enormous chopper up to killing speed as it did so.
And again.
Badrukk roared and his lads opened fire once more. Badrukk himself aimed for the machine's head, hunched low beneath its massive shoulders, and the high-pitched whine of the Ripper rang out as its shells punched through the adamantium shielding protecting the pilot. This walker collapsed too as its legs no longer kept up with its forward momentum, and it crashed down, crushing beneath it a custom booster blaster that had decided to race a warbike through the shadow of the falling war machine. The top of the walker came to rest just in front of Badrukk, who stood unruffled as the dust of its landing billowed up around him. Uftak watched in awe as the freebooter captain strode up onto the back of the mighty war machine. placed one boot upon the back of its head, and raised the Ripper in the air triumphantly.
When we's done here, I want this thing's head cut off,
Badrukk instructed the grot lurking by his boot.
It's gonna look great on the front of the black tooth. That's an orc,
Wazuk said with feeling. So we see in this passage how Kaptin Badrukk is a daring and inspiring frontline commander, relishing the opportunity to show why he is known as the Flashist of Gitz, not only for the opulence of his loot but also for the impressive manner he intervenes directly to further his own legend and that of his boys. But being shown up isn't the only worry for a war boss. Badrukk is also known to undermine the authority of his employers, as we see in this exchange with Ufthark and his bad moons on the planet.
What sort of war boss lets his lads run around like this?
Badrukk tutted, hefting the Ripper as though daring any of them to take issue with his words.
You look like decent boys, but you ain't gonna get anywhere following some jumped up mech what thinks he's all that. What you lads would benefit from is some real leadership.
Ufthark blinked in surprise.
You offering us a place?
Badrukk shrugged and grinned.
Could always use more hands, right? We'd knock you into shape soon enough. You could learn from a proper leader. One what fights at the front. Not like that so-called Met Lord.
He leaned closer and lowered his voice to a slightly more conspiratorial tone.
Between you and me, I reckon he's just jealous that I can teleport wherever I want now, thanks to my rock. But where is he, eh? The Mech Lord. Still stuck up there in that cruiser, instead of down here stomping heads like a proper boss.
And of course, as well as bullying his way to the best loot, Badrukk is not afraid to apply his immense cunning to a well-timed double cross to secure the best booty.
Get out the way, you scurvy squigs.
Ufthark tensed. He knew that voice.
I said move, or you're gonna taste the Ripper.
The bellowing voice ordered, and the Bad Moon shuffled reluctantly aside to reveal the scowling, gaudily dressed and impressively hatted shape of Kaptin Badrukk.
You!
He bawled, pointing at Ufthark.
You stole my flyer, and then you crashed it into that thing and wrecked it.
Ufthark didn't see any point in denying it.
Yeah?
He tightened his grip on the snaz hammer. He was big boss now, and that meant he didn't back down from anyone.
And what you gonna do about it?
A few tense moments followed, where every orc present eyed their neighbours and got ready to start breaking heads. A broad, toothy grin spread across Badrukk's face.
Nothing.
Ufthark's forehead wrinkled in confusion.
Nothing? Nothing.
Badrukk repeated.
Oh, I was gonna kill ya when your grot nicked me teleport homer and you disappeared. And doubly so when I realised you'd nicked me flyer. But then I saw you crash it into that thing, and I ain't gonna lie, that were brilliant. I ain't even mad. Probably time for me to get an upgrade anyhow.
Ufthark felt utterly wrong-footed. He'd expected some sort of repercussion from nicking the Flash Gitz personal flyer, and here Badrukk was, laughing, and saying it was no problem. Ufthark wasn't really sure how he felt about that. After all, a fight was a fight, and a fight was good. But there were lots of orcs here, and every orc that died would be one less to go and fight things that weren't orcs somewhere else. So that would have seemed sort of a waste.
Maybe I'll nick that one too,
he said, feeling something of the sort was expected of him, but Badrukk took no notice.
What I want to know is what that thing was doing up here,
the captain said.
Couldn't make it out from where I was. It was digging or something,
Ufthark said, pointing at the mess of broken rock beneath their feet. Some orcs were standing on it, but most were staying off it.
Dunno what for. I reckon that's worth finding out,
Badrukk said with a gleam in his eye.
Come on lads, let's get shifting this stuff.
The Flash Gitz with him bent to it, picking up pieces of rock and throwing them away. Not wanting to be outdone, the Bad Moons joined in, and soon the night was full of smashed boulders being hurled down the mountain as far as orc muscles could propel them, with each hurler claiming victory due to either distance achieved or weight of the rock thrown, or both. Before long, most of the debris had been cleared away and the faint gleam of metal was revealed. It was longer and wider than several orcs laid out head to boot, and it was dented from where the Gargant killer had been hammering down on the rock above it, and in one place it had been punctured.
That ain't much.
One of the Flash Gitz said.
That ain't what we're looking for.
The Mech Lord replied, his own interest clearly now piqued.
That's a roof, or a lid or something. Whatever it is we're after will be inside.
He activated the whirling heads of his shock hammer.
Let's get it open.
He brought the famous and feared weapon down. There was a bright blue flash and a large chunk of the metal disappeared to reveal a dark gulf beneath. However, Uftak's keen eyes could just make out a further reflection down in the gloom.
There's definitely something in there,
he shouted.
You heard the Mech Lord?
Badrukk bellowed, and the rest of the lads set to it with choppers and power claws. It was a matter of moments before the lid, or roof, was cut open and prized apart, and they stood around looking at, well, Uftak still wasn't sure. It certainly looked impressive. He had to give it that. It was probably about the size of a truck, and covered with intricate vents and loads of flashing lights. Humies did love flashing lights. Not to mention various dials and levers. It was humming gently, but it didn't seem about to explode, so that was something. Kaptin Badrukk hopped down into the gap between the thing and the wall of the chamber it had been enclosed in, and proceeded to walk around it, prodding at it. Uftak heard a couple of metallic clanks as he progressed.
Well,
the Mech Lord said.
What's it look like?
Uftak became suddenly aware that of course there were two warlords here, and only one of them would be able to claim this whatever it was. If Badrukk said it was valuable, the Mech Lord would fight him for it, which meant Uftak and the Bad Moons would be fighting the Flash Gitz. If Badrukk said it wasn't valuable, the Mech Lord would think he was trying to pull a fast one, and they'd probably end up fighting anyway.
Well?
The Mech Lord shouted again as Badrukk continued walking round the machine.
What'd you see?
Kaptin Badrukk placed a small, shiny gizmo on the machine, which stuck to it with a clank, then looked up at the Mech Lord and at Uftak. He grinned.
A pair of suckers!
He pressed a button on his cuff, and 4 bright flashes of light lit up the whole, one from each corner of the machine and one from the site of each clank. When the light died down a moment later, Badrukk was gone. And so was the machine. Where Badrukk will show up next is anyone's guess. Maybe he will continue to build his own forces from the greater numbers of freebooters caused by the opening of the Great Rift. Maybe he will align with Ghazghkull and his vision to create the greatest war the galaxy has ever seen. Either way, you can bet he'll continue to build the legend of the Freebooter King. Would you like to see Badrukk getting an impressive new model and some tasty rules in the upcoming Orc Codex? A proper war boss for a shooty orc list to Ghazghkull's melee-focused green-tide talents? I hope you've enjoyed this look at Kaptin Badrukk. If you have, please hit the like button and maybe I've earned your sub today. And I'll see you again in the near future, where there is only war.